I want to welcome Her Excellency Meera Shankar to the podium today, and thank you for being here in Minnesota.
Thank you to the Indian Chamber of Commerce for putting together this breakfast this morning. Thank you to the Honorable Speaker, Margaret Callagher, for being present. Thank you to Mayor Elizabeth Cots for being present today. And of course, we saw something of what the Women's Business Council will do when we were lighting the lamp. It gets things unstuck. It's a great opportunity for me to talk to you a little about India. I think we're going through a very exciting time in India, and we see that there is hope for the future. There's a mood of optimism in the country, and I think this is for a variety of reasons that we think that despite all the challenges that India faces, that we are on a path where we hope to be able to provide all our people a decent life and fundamental dignity. I think the reasons for this are many, but I will touch upon just a few. I think first of all is the scale, because India is a country of 1 billion people, 1.1 billion is the population today, and we look set to becoming the largest, most populous country in the world at some time in future. So what 1 billion people do or do not do, the choices that they make, the goods that they buy, will in a sense exert an influence not just within the country, but within the region and within the broader globe. So business companies all over the world who are looking at positioning themselves for the future need to factor in the scale that India represents. I think the second factor would be that this is one of the countries which is growing at a very rapid pace and hopes to continue growing at a very rapid pace. Our economy post-independence was somewhat inward-looking and autarkic. We didn't have very high growth rates. We grew at a rate of about 3% per annum, and this used to be ironically called the Hindu rate of growth. Post the 91 economic reforms, when we deregulated the economy internally, opened it up externally through a reduction in tariffs, opening up to foreign direct investment, that we have begun to see an acceleration in the pace of growth. In the 80s, when we did some marginal reforms, not very major reforms, we saw our growth quicken from an average of 3% to 5%. Then in the 90s, we were hitting something like 6%, early 90s. But by the late 90s, our growth had accelerated to 9% a year for 4 years in a row before the global economic crisis. We were impacted by the crisis. You know, we realized that the whole world is interconnected, and even though our financial sector was sound and remains unaffected, no Indian bank has been involved in subprime mortgages, nevertheless, we felt the impact because of US portfolio investors or investors from Europe who withdrew money from the Indian stock market. So Indian stock values went down. Then we found that external commercial borrowings had dried up for our companies, export credits had dried up. All our export-driven industries, which are labor-intensive, such as gems and jewelry, textiles and garments, leather, got affected because of plunging demand in all three markets. Nevertheless, we have weathered the crisis better than most economies. We did not have a recession. We continued to have growth, though our growth moderated. It came down from 9% to 6.7% in 2008. But given the circumstances, I think this was still a creditable performance. In 2009, the year just ended, our financial year ended on 1st April. We are projecting, the government is projecting growth rates of 7.2%, but with the data coming in, it seems that it could be higher and it could be closer to 7.5%. For 2010, which is the financial year which has just begun, the predictions and the projections range between 8.25% to 8.75%. That's the broad range of projections. Those who are cautious say 8.25, those who are more optimistic say 8.75. But roughly you're looking at growth beyond 8% as the projections for the year 2010. Our aim is to get back to a growth rate of 9 to 10% and to sustain it for several decades, because that is what we need to be able to overcome some of the accumulated challenges and also to provide employment for people who are coming into the job market. We are reasonably confident that we could be able to sustain this kind of growth because our macroeconomic fundamentals are very sound. We have high rates of savings. I think it's varied between 35 to 36%, 34, 35, 36% has been the range in which our savings rate has been growing. And similarly, the investment rate has been high. It's again gone from 37 sometimes to even 38%. So again, we're looking at a very high savings rate and a high investment rate. And that means that both domestic savings and domestic investments provide a fundamental foundation for our growth. And in one sense, our growth has been somewhat different from the East Asian export-led model because it's not been export-driven. It has really been driven on the basis of expansion of the domestic market and expansion of domestic investment. As more people come into the middle class, as Indians have more spending power and more money in their hands, this rate of growth will be sustained, but obviously our exposure to the international economy will also grow. Right now, our trade, for instance, with the US is marginally in our favor. It's grown rapidly. Between 2004 and 2007, it doubled, and it reached about 43 billion in 2008. It came down in 2009 because of the recession in the US economy, but in the first few months of 2010, we are seeing growth of about 17%, both in exports and imports. Services trade, which I find attracts quite a lot of attention in the US media, because sometimes there is a sense that this is one way and that jobs are being exported to India. But the interesting thing is that US data itself shows that trade in services between the two countries is broadly balanced. It was about 9.2 billion worth of US exports to India in 2007 and about 9.6 billion worth of Indian exports to the US in services in 2008. In 2007, sorry. In 2008, this figure increased to 10 billion for the US and 12 billion for India. So roughly broadly balanced trade. And while there are exports of software and IT-enabled services from India to the US, there are exports of financial services, accountancy, consultancy services from the United States to India. And this is one of the phenomenon of the Indian economy, that we are, because we are growing rapidly right now, we are importing more than we export.